We're going to start talking about understanding the profits in our account. Once we start running these accounts and we start generating conversions and we have our conversion data, we have our values per conversion, we want to get a sense of, are we profitable? Are we making money? How could we improve our account to be making more money? How could we improve our account to be generating a higher ROI, a higher ROAS? And that question essentially starts with asking, how much should I pay per click? How much am I willing to pay per click? Remember when we first initially created our default max CPC bids, when we first created the campaign? We needed to create just a basic default max CPC bid because we didn't have any data. We didn't know how much our clicks were going to cost. We didn't know what our conversion rate would be, what percentage of those clicks were going to lead to a sale. We didn't even know how much a conversion was worth to us at that point. So we have to always start off our campaigns in our account with educated guesses of our default max CPC bids. But that's not how we should always manage the account. Eventually, once we start seeing our conversion rates and once we start seeing our value per conversion, once we start seeing our real actual live cost per click, we should be able to start getting a very good understanding of what would be a profitable max CPC bid by going through a number of calculations. The first step in understanding and being able to develop your own profitable bidding strategy is understanding the difference between ROI and ROAS. Okay? Return on ad spend, which is ROAS, refers to a very simple calculation that doesn't take your company's profit margins into account. It's simply looking at your returns from what you spent on ads to what you made in conversions, the value of those conversions. Okay, so for example, if you're an e-commerce store and you sell physical goods and you sold 10 items that cost the consumer $10 each and you're using that conversion tracking to track those values, so your value is $100 for those sales. But that's not necessarily the profit your company got, because for example, let's say you only make a 50% profit margin because you have to buy the goods and there's a cost of shipping. Then your value per conversion, your profit per conversion is really only $50 and not $100. But ROAS does not take that into account. Return on ad spend simply looks at your return, the total revenue that you made divided by the cost of advertising. And total revenue here refers to the total value of those conversions, not necessarily the profit. ROI, which is return on investment, is a more thoughtful calculation that takes into account your company's profit margins. In order to calculate ROI, you need to know your margins. You need to have a good understanding of your business. And now, I'm not talking about your lighting bill. You don't have to necessarily calculate that from the outset, or the cost of your internet provider, or the cost of rent for your office. Those are all things which should eventually be taken into an ROI calculation. But what we're really talking about is the cost of goods, shipping, and the associated costs with a consumer or a client. For example, if you're in the service industry, there might be certain costs that are associated with every client. You have to pay for certain software for them. You have to go and meet with them in person, perhaps. Those are costs associated, and those would go into your overall profit margins per conversion. Okay, so you need to know your profit margins in order to calculate ROI. And obviously, I can't help you create your profit margins. You need to know what your profit margins are for your business. And when I say profit margins, I mean how much of every dollar do you put in your pocket at the end of the day. Okay, if we say you have a 50% profit margin, that means that of every dollar you make, 50% goes to servicing the client or the cost of goods, whatever that may be, and 50% goes in your, and 50 cents goes in your pocket. So ROI, the calculation, the formula for ROI is revenue, meaning the conversion value, minus cost, revenue minus cost divided by cost of advertising. Oops. Revenue minus cost divided by the cost of advertising, okay? That's going to be your ROI calculation. A couple things we have to know when we talk about calculating ROI versus ROAS. One is we must have our conversion tracking in place. Okay, that's very important for us to be able to even start talking about calculating ROI in our AdWords account. If we're not tracking conversions, we'll have no idea what our conversions are and what our conversions values. Number two, which is what I just said, conversions have to have values. you need to be tracking some sort of, you need to be attaching or attributing some sort of value to each conversion. If it's e-commerce, it's really easy because you could use dynamic transaction conversion tracking, dynamic value conversion tracking, and you'll know exactly how much money of products, revenue of products you sold. If you're talking about form submissions as a conversion tracking or as a phone call, this is something that we touched upon previously. You need to figure out how much is a form worth to your business? How much is a lead worth to your business? For example, if you close 1 out of 10 clients and every client brings in X amount of dollars, you'll be able to calculate exactly how much each form submission from AdWords is worth. But you have to attach some sort of value to each conversion. And number 3, you need to know your margins, like we just said, okay? So you have 3 primary prerequisites to tracking conversions. And now we have our 2 formulas. We have ROAS, return on ad spend, which is total revenue divided by cost of advertising, and ROI, which is revenue from the advertising minus the cost of advertising divided by the cost of advertising. Okay, these are 2 formulas that's super important for you to remember. And of course, don't forget, in order to calculate ROI, you need to know your profit margins. Okay, so those are some really important things. Let's go through a real life example to give you some context in which to understand ROI and ROAS. Okay, let's come with an example. Let me get a different colored marker here. Let's take a blue marker. Okay. Now here we have an example written out. I already wrote out the example for you. Your ad spend, for example, is $897. Okay, so let's say your ad spend is $897 and your conversion value is $1432. Now remember, this could be done with any data point in your account. This could be at the keyword level. We could be looking at ad spend of a single keyword and the conversion value of that single keyword. We could be looking at ad spend of an entire ad group and the conversion value of that entire ad group. We could be looking at ad spend of a campaign and the conversion value of that campaign. And we could be looking at ad spend of the entire account. We could be looking at ad spend of a geographical location. We could be looking at ad spend over the course of a certain hour in the day or a certain day in the week. So any data point could undergo this exact same mathematical calculation. So obviously, as advertisers, we really want to be looking at things at the keyword level. That's kind of where we want to see our data at the keyword level. So for example, let's say we have a keyword, buy office chairs online because we're advertising for Poppin', and we see over the course of the last 14 days, let's say, it doesn't matter what the date range is, it's the same calculation for any date range you're looking at. Our ad spend was $897. We spent $897 on that keyword, buy office chairs online. Let's just put our keyword here. So let's say our keyword is buy office chairs online. Okay, so that's our keyword that we are analyzing. So our ad spend is once again $897, conversion value is $1432. So let's plug in our calculations for return on ad spend. So total revenue would be our conversion value. So we have ROAS equals 1432, right? 1432 for our total revenue, simply divided by the cost of ads, divided by 897. And if you open up your calculator and take a look at what that is, the answer is 1.59, okay? If you don't believe me, check it up for yourself, but I'm pretty sure this is right. So return on ad spend, we take 1432 divided by 897, that equals 1.59. But what does that number 1.59 really mean? Okay? Well, let me tell you. You might hear people refer to this as a 1.59 ROAS, return on ad spend. I would simply like to call this 159% return on ad spend. So I would call this number a 159% return. And what does that mean? That means you're making 59 cents on every dollar. Or in other words, it means for every dollar you spend on an ad, you make an average of $1.59 back. So it's 59 cents profit, and I say profit in quotation marks because we don't know our margins yet. But essentially, we'd be making 159% back on the dollar, which is 59 cents made back on every single dollar. Okay, so that's a very simple calculation to understand our ROAS, our return on ad spend. But now let's get a little bit more complicated. Let's get a little bit more thoughtful. Say we wanted to figure out our profit, our return on investment, taking into account our profit margins, okay? So now let's say, for example, let's move over here, okay? So get a little bit more view. Maybe we'll change the color. Let's go to black here. And we're going to use the same data, okay? We're still going to be talking about this keyword, same spend of $8.97 and conversion value of $14.32, okay? Now let's say, for example, we had a 70% profit margin, okay? And this is the new information that we're going to take into account. So we have a 70% profit margin. PF stands for profit margin, okay? Our profit margins are 70%, which means for every dollar that we make, that Poppin makes, or your company makes, you make 70 cents. Pretty good profit margins, okay? Now you might ask me how I came to that number, and I just made it up. You're going to have to be able to come to your own profit margin number yourself. So let's just say we have a 70% profit margin, but what does that mean in terms of costs? What are our costs if our profit margins are 70%? That means simply 30% of the dollar is made up of costs, okay? Now costs can mean servicing the client, costs can mean cost of goods. You might even be taking into account your lighting bill, your rent, your salaries, whatever it may be. But you determined that 30%, your profit margins are 70%, and 30% is cost. So the first thing we need to do is calculate our total revenue, okay? Our revenue taking into account our profit margins, okay? So what we want to do is calculate our cost for the revenue that we made, okay? Because here's our number. If you look at our formula up here, this number cost, how do we know what the cost was, okay? And that's a very simple calculation. We take our total revenue, which is $14.32, right? So cost equals $14.32, which is our total revenue, multiplied by our costs, okay? Multiplied by 0.3, because 30% is our cost of advertising. So what's 1432 times multiplied by 0.3? That comes out to, and once again you can check it up, 429.60. Okay? So this is, it might look complicated, but it's very simple. What we're saying is in this number, this total revenue, our AdWords account told us that we made $1,432 from our ads. But because I know that 30% of that goes to servicing the client or whatever it is, it's not profit, we need to take out $429.60 from 1432. And now, once we created a calculation to determine our cost based on the total revenue, we could simply go ahead now and create our ROI calculation. Because now we'll do revenue minus cost. Look at, I'm going to plug in this formula down here. So revenue minus cost is 1432 minus 429.60. Okay, and we're going to divide that by our cost of advertising, which is $8.97. Okay, that's how much we spent on advertising. So that's going to be our calculation to determine what our ROI truly is. Okay, and if you do this math, you get a value of 1.11. Okay, this number is our ROI. Now, interestingly enough, and this is something which you would definitely have realized just thinking about this, this number, 1.11, is lower than 1.59. So we have an ROAS of 1.59. So we're saying, hey, listen, we're making 59 cents on every dollar. But in fact, once you take your costs into account, you're only making 11 cents on the dollar, okay? You're making 11 cents on the dollar, or you could also write it as 111% ROI. which is still good, right? You're still profitable. As long as it's above 100%, that's something which is very important for you guys to know. As long as your ROI is above 100, you're making money. If it's exactly 100, you're breaking even. If it's below 100, you're losing money. As long as your ROI is above 100, you're making money. If it's exactly 100, you're breaking even. If it's below 100, you're losing money, okay? And on that note, let's talk about something of a slightly different example, okay? Let's say, for example, let me erase this here. Let's talk about a case where we actually have a lower profit margin, okay? Let's say we're not as good of a business. We don't have the type of business that has a 70% profit margins, okay? Let's say, for example, our profit margins were only 40%, okay? The tables have been turned on us. So we have a 40% profit margin, which, guys, tell me how much of that is cost. If my profit margins are 40%, then obviously 60% is 60 cents on the dollar goes to the costs, okay? So I have a little bit more of an expensive business to advertise for. Now, I want to do the same exact mathematical calculation. The first thing I need to do is figure out this number here. What is my cost? What is my cost to the business, okay? And just for clarity's sake, this divided by cost, this is really cost of ads. This cost is the cost of doing business. So I do the same thing, right? So I take my total ad spend, I take my total conversion value, right, which is 1,432, right? 1,432, and to get my cost of doing business, I have to multiply that by 0.6. Okay, that is how I get the cost of doing business for these profit margins. And if you do the math in your calculator, 1432 multiplied by 0.6 comes out to 859.20. Okay, so I have 859.20. Now what I need to do is plug in my ROI calculation. So ROI equals revenue, which is 1432 minus 859.20 divided by my cost of ads, which is 897. And do you know what we get when we plug in these numbers here? We get a total, and let me put this in red because it's a red number. Red is bad. 0.63. All right. I hope you're following along with your calculator. And this is our ROI for the same conversion value, but with different profit margins. Right? The same ad spend, the same conversion value, but we changed around our profit margins. Now, instead of pocketing 70 cents, we only pocket 40 cents on the dollar. And this is a 0.63 ROI, which means we're losing money. Overall in the account, we're losing money. Okay, that's what ROI means over there. 0.63, meaning, what does that mean? For every dollar we spend, we only make 63 cents back. So we're losing money. We're losing 37 cents every time we spend a dollar in advertising. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you should shut off your campaigns. In fact, in most cases, it doesn't. Because there's other types of value that a client brings. You have to think about word of mouth referrals. You have to think about the value of your company getting more exposure. It might be perfectly fine to have a 0.63% ROI. It totally depends on your marketing goals and your business goals. It really, really depends, and it's greatly influenced. Your marketing goals, your business goals are greatly influenced by what would be an acceptable ROI or what would be an acceptable ROAS. And once again, if you don't have profit margins, if your company sells digital goods and there's no real cost of servicing the client, then ROAS is the way to go. Return on ad spend. Just look at your conversion value and determine the profitability of your account using the ROAS calculation. That's perfectly fine. Now, one more very, very important factor here, and let's do a little bit of an erasing. We want to figure out what is our break-even point. If I know my profit margins, it would be a great piece of information to know how much, it would be a good piece of information to know how much I could spend or how much I need to spend to break even. That's called our break-even point. How do we determine what our break-even point is? And that's actually a really simple thing to do. But once again, even before we do that, you still need to know what your profit margins are. That's one thing that AdWords cannot tell you. You need to sit down and figure out exactly what your profit margins are. But once we know our profit margins, we're able to easily calculate what our ROI needs to be. So for example, let's talk about a case where our profit margins are, let's say, 40%, okay? So our profit margins are 40%. And you don't need to have run an AdWords account to know this. This is something which you could determine well before you run your AdWords account. I know that if I sell a product or a good or a service for $100 and my profit margins are 40%, that means I've made $40. It's very straightforward. It's very simple. Okay? So, but how much do I need to make for every dollar spent advertising to break even with a 40% profit margin? So the calculation for that is really simple. Okay? You just simply divide your profit margin into 1. So it's 1 divided by 0.4. And for those of you who know math, it's an easy answer. For those of you who don't, simply crack out a calculator. That equals 2.5. Okay? 2.5 is my minimum ROI, my ROAS, in order to break even. Or in other words, this is also the same thing as saying 250%. What you're saying is, in order for me to be profitable, I need to make back $2.50 for every dollar spent on advertising. Why? Because if you think about it this way, I'm going to help you understand what this number is. For every $2.50 you make, right? For every $2.50 of sales, you only make $1 because that's your profit margin, right? You're only making 40% of that. So that's $1. And then you subtract $1 for the ads, and then you're left with 0. So that's your break-even point, okay? You spent $1, you made $2.50, and you come out being equal at 0 because for that $2.50 that you made, you profited $1, and then you have to pay Google that $1 for the ad that you spent. Okay, so in order to break even, or you need to be making at least $2.50 on advertising. In order to be profitable with profit margins of 40%, you need to be making anything above $2.50. If you're making $2.51, you're profitable to a penny. Okay, and so on and so forth. So that's how you calculate your break-even point. So this introduction to ROI and ROAS is crucial to help you be able to start understanding how to calculate your profits. Once you're tracking conversions and you have your conversion values in place and you know your margins, you could really intelligently calculate how successful your AdWords campaigns are. And this is when you really begin to get a sense of how you're doing and where you could improve in the account. You'll be able to find certain keywords have a really low ROI. Certain keywords have a really good ROI, even though the costs per click might be much, much more expensive for the better ROI, for the higher ROI keywords. And actually that's usually something you're going to find frequently, because the better keywords that generally lead to more sales are also the keywords that your competitors are advertising on more aggressively. So you might find certain keywords with much higher cost per click, but really they're the ones that are driving business, and that not only do you know that they're driving business, you'll be able to know the profitability by using ROI and ROAS, knowing your margins, making sure your conversions values are being tracked. So that's a very good foundation from which we're going to be able to eventually create profitable max CPC bids. In the next video, let's walk through understanding a profitable bidding strategy, how to look at revenue per click, and how to use the information, the historic data in your account to determine what your max CPC bid should be. We'll see you right back here in a couple minutes. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was a really good one. This stuff is really, really exciting for me. And cheers for now, and I will see you very soon. Thanks.